Hello and welcome to the First Right Podcast, a weekly conservative news show brought to you by Restoration of America. I'm your host, Doug Truax, founder and president of Restoration of America. Today we're excited to have a chance to connect with Chris Buskirk, the editor at American Greatness. Chris is a serial entrepreneur, author, and contributor to several conservative, free-thinking publications across the country. Welcome to the show, Chris. Thanks for coming on.
Well, I appreciate you having me.
So before we get into the book, great book, by
Yep.
the way, loved it. Just give our viewers a sense of your background, how you got to where you are today. I know it's varied. There's a lot of cool stuff in here, and I definitely want them to hear it.
I can't help. I got to tell you this. I get asked this question at the beginning of interviews all the time, and I always think the exact same joke goes through my mind, which is the joke from the movie Airplane from the '80s. In the beginning, the Earth cooled, and then there were the dinosaurs. Right. I'm not that old, but
we're getting there.
But we're getting there. Like every day, a little older.
That's right.
I don't look. I grew up in Arizona. I went away to college, came back, and then I spent about 20 years as an entrepreneur in finance-related businesses. Founded, built, sold a couple of companies, and then about 7-8 years ago, 2015, I made a decision that it was after having sold a company. I made a decision I was going to get much more heavily involved in politics. Why? People would always ask me. They'd say like, we always thought you were not insane. Like, why are you doing this to yourself?
I get that sometimes.
Yeah, right. And my answer to everybody was it sounded slightly crazy, but also totally true. And people, I think, either got it or didn't. Which is, I've got a family, I've got kids, and I felt like I had a responsibility to try and make the country better and leave it better than I found it. Yeah. And there's a lot of work to be done, and I was fortunate to be in a position where I could do that. And so I got very involved in political stuff back in 2015. It's just kind of grown and grown and grown, and sort of that entrepreneurial instinct is, it's part of just who I am and what I do. So it's followed me into doing a lot of political projects. The first thing I ever did in politics at any sort of meaningful scale was a web magazine called American Greatness, which has sort of gone from strength to strength.
Oh, and we're going to cover that today for sure. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm in favor of American Greatness, the institution, the journalistic enterprise, but also the concept and trying to what would be a good phrase for this? Make America great again.
Right. How about it?
But yeah, so then as it does, one thing led to another, and I just got more involved in trying to not just come up with something that was like a temporary solution, but it's just again, it's sort of that business instinct. Like, how do you build institutions that can get stronger and more effective over time, and try and build those sorts of things. Like my kind of one of my running analogies on this stuff is I feel like a lot of people who grew up in politics, who work in politics, it's always like, oh, we're thirsty, I'm going to grab a bucket, I'm going to run up the mountain to where the spring is, I'm going to bring a bucket down. I'm going to do that every time we get thirsty. Right. And my instinct is that's a really dumb way to do it. Why don't we just build an aqueduct and bring the water down here,
exactly.
and so it's just flowing to us.
Sure.
And that's sort of the mentality I bring to trying to come up with and build solutions.
Yeah, I've seen that too. Better. Totally in politics with the on-year, off-year concept. Which definitely goes to this deal. It's
right.
Oh, we're rebuilding again this year. It's like, well, didn't we just do this 2 years ago? It's like,
right.
Well, we took a year off, and now we're back at it again, right?
Right. The style. I say this to political consultants and people like that all the time. Like, we got to stop thinking about politics as like a pop-up restaurant. It's like it's not a food truck. You've got trying to build something that's always on. There are not off years if you want to win.
That's right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Permanent assets is the way to do
correct.
it. And I really love your background, and I'm a business guy too, and coming into politics and having that concept around, well, if you are going to build some permanent assets, then there's metrics, there's the way you normally track these things, there's donor accountability, there's all these things that kind of go into it, which is a lot of times, frankly, missing in the political world.
Yeah.
And so I think that guys like you are a breath of fresh air to folks that are saying to themselves, why can't we keep this going? Because essentially, the business community, you do your thing quarter over quarter over quarter, but in politics, you're racing to a time, right? There's an election, but if you kind of restart, 9 months out from the election every year, you're never going to get there. So you got to smooth it out in a business sense.
No, that's right. It's got to be Democrats are very good at this, by the way, as you know.
Permanently organized.
Permanently organized. That's, there's one part of this discussion which kind of goes to the book a little bit is this is where I feel like people who are right of center need to update their priors, so to speak. There is a belief and a desire that the United States is basically sort of this, like almost like this Jeffersonian republic or Jeffersonian democracy or whatever, in which it's like broadly middle class, and it's like you have small merchants, artisans, farmers over here, and everybody's kind of independent. And the political implication of that is politics is kind of back here, kind of takes care of itself, and we're going to get together at like the town hall like every so often, and we're going to debate things out based on the merits, and somebody's going to raise their hand and be like, okay, yeah, that isn't it. Like, you know, there are more people in Phoenix where I live than there were in all 13 colonies at the time of the founding. There's 330 million people in this country, and it's a very, very different country than it was. It's some good, some bad, but than it was 150 or 200 years ago, and we need to be thinking about things in that way. And one of the reasons I wrote the book is, you know, when you think about this sort of broadly middle class country in which you have these sort of independent, you have these people who are sort of independent because they're an artisan, they're a merchant, they're, you know, a business person, they're a farmer in the classical, you know, conception of it. That's also less true. There are a lot less of these. There are a lot less. Well, first of all, the middle class keeps getting smaller. It's been shrinking for 50 years. It gets poorer. It gets less secure, you know, both physically and economically. But also, there's a lot less independence. You know, I think about, just by way of example, we saw this in COVID in a big way, right? People were forced to do things that they would not otherwise do. Those people who were solidly in the middle class or upper middle class, because they didn't have any independence. Like, they didn't run their, like, I don't know, whatever, 3 stores that were, I don't know, like install car stereos, just whatever the generic business is. But because they were middle class on an economic scale, but they didn't have independence because they were working for Johnson & Johnson or for Amazon or whatever. And so the edict comes down, you've got to do X, Y, or Z. Or, you know, I think about the medical profession. My father-in-law's a recently retired surgeon. He had the classic sort of, you know, what you think of as like classic medical practice. Small business. He was an independent. He could do what he wanted to do. That's much, much less true in medicine now than it was. Gosh, like, it's moved into, you know, it's moved into these big group practices. That's a lot of doctors work for hospital systems now. So they have less independence too. And I think for what the sort of country we want, I think requires more people to have more economic independence, because that's really a predicate to political independence.
Oh, absolutely. And then so let's get into the book. This is a good book. Chris is a super smart guy. We're going to start with some of these things. It's just a good segue into what the heck is wrong, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things, and you know, I would commend anybody to read this because it's super helpful the way you laid it out using stats and all your economic background and everything, and say, this is what you're feeling. You know, I think you used the term at the end, kind of a national entropy. Yeah. Where it's like, well, everything's getting wobbly, right? Yep. And so, but you do a great job through the chapters of narrowing down and saying, this is how this is failing, so to speak, and this is, you know, and getting to what we need to do. But let's get into more specifically, what do you see? What are the problems?
Yeah, so let me say the book focused on, as you say, I tried to be very concrete in defining the problems where things could be measured, and I know sometimes people on our side, it makes them a little uncomfortable to talk about that, just a little, not a lot, honestly, because people want to say, and I addressed this early in the book, people want to say it's a spiritual crisis, and I stipulate up front, I agree, like I 100% agree with that, but number one, that's not really a political problem that can be solved. Number two is I just wanted to write a different book because I wanted to address things that were could be defined, that could be really concretized, and that were, I thought, susceptible to political solutions. I'm 100% for the spiritual solution too, Amen. But this isn't that. This isn't that book.
We're on the same page there. Yeah, for sure.
So when I was thinking through the book, in fact, it's funny. I sort of wrote almost like more than half of quite a different book, which I wound up like tossing because I was like, you know, this is like, it's just like too much complaining really in the book, and that actually just became the first couple chapters when I condensed it down. Funny. I said, here, look, if we want to have a solution, we need to identify the problem in a very concrete, quantifiable way. And so what I wanted to focus on was, I thought, the things that would define what we would think of as success. What's the country we want? Like politics at its most base root is about building the country you want to live in. Okay, and part of that is, what is the average person? What's their experience of life? And I thought, well, okay, so what would be the things that we'd all agree that we want? Well, people should live longer. They should be healthier. They should have the ability to have a family and a stable one if they want one. They should be able to raise children on one single median income. In other words, if people want to have both parents working, that's up to them. But economically, it should be possible to raise a family on a single income. The United States had that basically from about the end of World War II until the late 80s, and it became the kind of the default setting, like this is like the American dream, and it is, because that's historically really unusual, especially like in the modern era.
You bet.
And we lost it. The last year it was possible to raise a single family on a median or a family on a single median income was like 1989. Defined and just middle class. Just what I say is you can own a house, you can own a car, you can send your kids to school. Just like nothing extravagant, but just what we think of in our mind as the conception of like just middle America.
Sure.
And that hasn't been possible for a long time, and that kind of plays out in a lot of different ways. You see it where family formation is down, total fertility rate, which is one of the things I talk about in the book. Total fertility rate is down, and this is again how I would define success, like a fertility rate that at least keeps up with the population. Like you may or may not be growing, but you shouldn't be shrinking. And fertility rate in this country is right now is about 1.74. The replacement rate is 2.1, roughly.
Right.
And
that's a problem.
That's a problem. Yeah, it's a problem. It's a bigger problem. Like if you look historically, and I talk about a little bit of this in the book, but civilizations often go through periods of population growth and decline over time, and they just sort of, for various reasons, it fluxes. We are in a period of organic decline, though it's stabilized and we grow a little bit because of net immigration. Sure. But the problem you have is you can't have a welfare state with a declining population. The math does not work. Right. And so people wonder to themselves, like why is there so much pressure for immigration? Well, I mean, the people who are very pro mass immigration are upfront about it. Is like we need more workers. We're not repopulating. They get super. It's weird. They get super nervous when you talk about fertility and things like that. Like, I don't know why. Like, having a family and having kids. Last time I checked, should be pretty normal, right?
Exactly. It's a great
topic. Right. I mean, but that's one of the reasons that there's so much pressure for immigration. There's cultural reasons and all those and political reasons that people want mass immigration. But there is this fundamental reality that if we just don't have that many workers, because median age in the United States has been growing since the 70s. It's right now 38 years old. And as you get more people who are older, who aren't working, and then you also have this welfare system, who's paying for it, right? The system we have right now is untenable, except for if we didn't have the dollar being the reserve currency, we could not do what we're doing.
Yeah, right.
So I don't know. Those are some of the problems. Is that all of these metrics? And by the way, there's other ones too. Like crime has been rising. Like violent crime has been on the increase. One of the weird, but in a way, it's a good stat. But there's a bad part of it too. Fewer people die from violent crime. On a per capita basis, but that's because of advances in wound care, trauma care. Right.
It's not what you think.
Yeah, right. There's lots of stabbings and beatings and things like this. But if you get to the hospital, so look, we are advancing in trauma care, which is a good thing.
There's a positive.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's sort of the overview is okay, and that's why I thought when these are all things that are definable. There's less social mobility, also definable. You can see if you are the child of a parent in X strata of society, can you go up or down? Right. It's much more. It's just much harder to go either up or down. Right. Interestingly enough, and so that also is that's a stressor on the type of government we have. Constitutional self-government is really hard to maintain, and when you have a stratified society that's also stagnant in the sense of lack of mobility. that gets to be a challenge for a lot of reasons. People sort of in the middle and below, they sort of lose hope and say, well, this is just, it's all rigged against me. People at the top of society, and when they realize they can't, that it's really hard to move down, you're like, that's because I have like access that other people don't have, and so then you start rent-seeking behavior, and you just start to agglomerate the wealth and the power even more so to the top, so it accelerates the problem. And all of this is, from the way I think about this, it is, all of this is in the service of one big end, which is how are we able to perpetuate the sort of freedoms we have in this country based on constitutional self-government. And I think that you can't do that if you don't have a big self-sustaining middle class.
Oh, absolutely. And you do a really nice job of pointing out the potential around the unraveling of this.
Yeah.
Back to what you're saying about a whole lot of people in the country who think they can't advance and then it's rigged against them. What's the alternative, right? And so, you get into the French Revolution and resentment and everything that, resentment, and then you're going to, okay, well, where are we today? What do we need to do? And so we'll segue into some solutions here. I think you did a great job, though, too, I hear like a lot of people say, well, the Roman Empire, they take, but you do a nice job of saying, well, it wasn't quite that simple.
Yeah.
They went down, like you said, they came back. Augustus made some, real good changes, and they brought it back from where they were. Can be done here if you do the right things going forward. And this gets into, okay, well, Chris, tell us what you think we should do. You've already mentioned some of the health things. I mean, it's really fascinating stuff here. Again, I'd recommend anybody read the book. But let's talk about, what can we do? What are some of the projects we can take on?
So the book I told you that I wrote and then basically tossed in the trash can was the Book of Complaints.
Right.
Right. It was like
we've all got that running in the back of our mind all the time.
Well, no, exactly. It's like we don't need another airing of grievances, though. I tell you, I was talking to a friend who, like, everybody who's watching this will definitely know who this person is. Written a few very popular books for the right. I said this to him a couple weeks ago. He said, "Yeah, I didn't want to write this whole book of complaints. It just wasn't what I wanted to do." He goes, "I don't know. It's been working for me. I've been selling a ton of those books."
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, sometimes it's just people going, "Hey, the guy gets me," right?
Yeah,
he hears what I'm complaining about and stuff. And I think that there's definitely a place for that because we do need to vent in some ways. I think it's a cathartic thing when you read. It's like, he gets what I'm feeling, but you got to get to the other side of like, hey, how do we get out of this?
Right. This goes back to like that sort of entrepreneurial mindset. Sure. It's like you see a problem and that's like really, it makes you itch. Right. But like, what's the solution? Right. Like it drives me crazy to just complain about it. Yeah. And so I thought the latter, I don't know what, maybe third of the book is potential solutions. Yep. And I'm quick to point out, like, none of these are a silver bullet. Like, none of these are like, aha, it's like kind of like those ads you see online, like one weird trick and you can save your country.
Pull you in,
but the way I think about it is that they're the things where you plant some seeds, and if they grow and they work, they point the way forward. Because the first thing is like, I had this sort of business mentor, and he had an expression he always used. It wasn't original to him, but he said, like, first rule of holes: stop digging.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so there's that, and then there's like, how do you get out? Yeah. And so some of the ideas that I talked about in there were really focused on decentralizing power and giving people more power over their own lives to build solutions. So one of the things I talked about in there was it was what's sometimes called charter cities, which, like, I know some people like eye roll at that but that is part of the problem, right? And let me say what a charter city is first. So a charter city would
fascinating concept.
Yeah, so it would exist within obviously the physical United States, but it would exist basically under a different legal rubric. And under that rubric, they would be given, like, it would be a de novo city. It's just like, here's, I don't know, whatever, 1,000 acres or 10,000 acres, whatever it takes. I guess it would be more like 10,000, not 1,000. But you know what I'm saying? A ton of land.
Right, yeah, right.
And they would basically be exempted from a lot of the existing rules. Still under the Constitution, obviously, but basically they'd be giving a very broad charter to just experiment. Build a new city, which is an audacious undertaking, which is, by the way, one of my annoyances when people sort of eye roll this idea, like, oh, what are you going to do, build a new city? You well, why not? Like,
Yeah.
we've built a ton of
Tell
them in
them
this
to read
country.
Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Get there somehow.
I mean, but if you do that and you just allow the experimentation, I think a couple things happen. One is that the act of having to build something out of nothing is really unique. And that's why, and you know this from the book, like this is, I think, part of what kept America as dynamic as it was, is that it was a frontier country.
Right.
And like innovation and dynamism always happen on frontiers. Like there's all these examples in history where frontiers are where all these interesting things happen and solutions are formed. Why? Because you have to. If you don't, you fail and you die.
Necessity.
Right,
Yeah,
necessity.
right.
It's mother of invention,
Right.
famously.
And it just draws in people that like that.
Correct.
You know, that's
correct.
the key.
So you get these sort of risk takers, innovators, just sort of interesting people. They'd have a pretty big problem, and the problem is you got a ton of land. Sure. What are you going to do with it to make it work? And a couple of years ago, I was talking to some people about something like this. They were like serious people looking at. Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned Atlas Shrugged. Like Ouray, Colorado, is the place that is supposed to be like Galt's Gulch. And they were actually looking at like what would happen if we bought up like everything in Ouray. Who would move there? And one of the problems that you run into, even if you're just doing like a thought experiment, is, well, how does that sustain itself? Like how do people not just earn income, but like how do you just have the necessities of life? And so these are hard problems, but look around. There's towns and cities every place. People have solved these problems before, and so I think like charter cities where you give people latitude in order to do things, I think that is a place where you say, okay, we're just going to agree to experiment,
right,
and see what happens.
Yeah.
And I guess my other retort to the people who kind of eye roll at this is like there is actually an example of this in the United States. It's not a perfect example, but it is an example, and that's Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico exists in a kind of a strange, like netherworld legally. It's part of the United States, obviously. It's not a state. But they are, like, for instance, they don't pay federal income tax. Like or I think they pay like a very low rate of federal income tax. But they exist like in the United States for like citizenship purposes. They're obviously under the military protection of the United States, but there are a bunch of regulations and rules that if you are a state apply, but if you are Puerto Rico do not apply. Right. I've actually looked at Puerto Rico quite a bit, and one of the things I have realized is that like there's a lot of things that could be happening in Puerto Rico that aren't. Like like more imagination needs to be shown in Puerto Rico. And I know like banking people and crypto people have done some stuff down there, but I think there's actually a lot more that could be done. So it's not something that's unprecedented.
Right.
Hong Kong, in a way, kind of played that role in Asia as being sort of a gateway between China, the PRC, and between basically the rest of the world. And Hong Kong, until it was taken over, was a very dynamic place. So that's one of the areas. Another area that that's pretty, like, it's kind of important to me is like I called it America 100. Like we should like state a goal of the median lifspan in the United States becoming 100 over a couple generations. And not just that, but that people are living healthier. Like we don't want something where we just have like rows of people in beds like hooked up to things.
That's right. Well, and then they have an opportunity to have a second career.
All kinds of things.
All kinds of stuff. If they're not, if they're still healthy and making things happen.
So this is a bit of an obsession of mine, is that like the United States, the median lifespan in the United States has been declining for 12 years. It is presently around 74 and a half years old. And as I say, the trajectory is all wrong. And people would say, well, I don't know, maybe that doesn't sound good, but it's a blip. It's not a blip. I mean, it's been happening for more than a decade. Also, we're going the opposite direction of our peer countries, like for instance in Western Europe. I mean, take France as an example. In the same time period, immediate life expectancy in France has been increasing. It's now up 84 point something. So basically about 10 years longer than the United States. And they're like this, going like this, and we're going like that. Right. That's bad. When you look at the other metrics of not just lifespan, but health, getting worse in the United States, getting better in a place like, for instance, France, which drives Americans crazy. What do you mean? The French? Come on.
That's right. Well, that's how they live.
Yeah, well, seriously.
What they eat, right? And what the drugs they take and all that stuff.
So my super provocative hot take on this, which is, I don't know if it's true or not, but I like it because it's got like it's just because it's a provocation a little bit, is that about 35% of French people are daily smokers, okay? And that's something like 12 or 13% in the United States.
Sure.
The French lifespan is higher, but also their incidence of heart disease, diabetes, all kinds of inflammatory disease is about 12 to 15% lower than in the United States.
Yeah.
And is it because of the smoking? Is there actually like a pro-smoking riff here? I think there actually. This part I'm serious, but I think I think there is a little bit, and it's not the smoking so much; it's the nicotine, which I think because the obesity rate in France is quite a bit lower than the United States. And so what I think it is that there's a link between nicotine and eating and obesity, and it's actually the lower incidence of obesity versus the United States.
You're smoking and not eating.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think that this French thing, there's that book called French Don't Diet. Have you seen this?
Yeah.
Well, a little bit of like, well, how does that happen? A ton of it is natural food.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a real problem in this country with all the processed food and where we've kind of gone over the decades of like, oh, just eat that, it's fine. No, the
we're
pyramid,
doing another podcast
right?
just on that subject.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
The pyramid, that's all wrong. Now, we've got sold that bill of goods, and I think that it's really catching up with people in the inflammation. And you even make the point too in your book. It's really funny, sad, but there's all these medications now to fix these things that are mostly fixable if you careful what you eat. But the side effects.
Right. Oh my gosh.
List of the side effects, like, okay, so this is going to fix me a little bit, but then I got all this other stuff to worry about too. It's like we're living in this alternate reality now about it.
It's totally insane. I've got to do like the shout out, like the seed oils in food are like insanely bad for you. Like polyunsaturated fats are just bad for you, which will drive, like, I don't know if Anthony Fauci insane to hear anybody say that. There'll probably be a SWAT team here in a few minutes. But like they are an inflammatory agent, and inflammation causes all of these bad health outcomes that we're talking about, diabetes and heart disease and so forth, arthritis, that we see a lot of. And when you are eating naturally produced foods, and you have the, like, for instance, monounsaturated fats that you would see like in grass-fed beef or whatever, those are actually good for you. You need those things.
That's right.
There's this show, you may have seen it. Do you know the show Alone? Like
no, I saw it. I watched it when it first came out.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
I'm obsessed with the show.
Yeah, right.
So what is the one thing that everybody realizes, and they say it on like every episode, the competitors, for people who don't know, like Alone is, you take a person who is alone and they stick them out in the wilderness, and there's like 10 of them, and whoever can survive longest with like a pocket knife and whatever, they win.
Flint.
Flint. They win like $500,000. Yeah. They always say the same thing, which is, I got to get enough fat in my diet. I got to get more fat in my diet. I got to get more fat in my diet. But some of them, that like by midway through the seasons are always like, I got to get more fat in my diet or I'm going to die. And
the guy who won first, he was like super overweight. I think
I was going to make that point. No, because it's so true. Because the fats that they're eating are like they would be getting are animal fats, which are good for you and necessary for your body. There is a funny strategy that you're alluding to. Some people go on the show, and what they do is they bulk up and try and get really obese before they're like, I don't have to do anything but wait.
I don't know.
I think one guy actually won doing that, right?
And so I think he spurred a whole movement in that show. But that's right. I mean, it's just like the foods that we eat. It's like we have gotten so. Some of this is just big country and goes back to the original point that you were bringing up about the lack of economic growth that we're experiencing. Then you have all these other factors come in that basically is shrinking your income, which then shrinks your ability to go buy necessities.
Anything else,
So then you do buy the stuff that's more processed. I mean, it's a terrible cycle that we're in, and we just have to get back to the economic growth. I mean, that's
the economic growth thing, and I just want to make this point, is because it's actually, there's a lot of it in the book, but look, what economists call total factor productivity, which is it's just doing more with less. Like you think about the change between plowing a field with like a donkey and a hand plow versus doing it with like a combustion engine and a tractor. Like the one guy can do 10x or orders of magnitude more than one guy could before. Or you think about the change when we electrified the country. Before there was no electricity. Now you have all this access to power, and all kinds of other things become possible, and one person can do a lot more than they could. That's what drives that productivity growth is what drives rising living standards.
Yep.
When productivity growth stagnates, then everything becomes zero sum.
That's right.
And that's the situation we're in now. Productivity growth has basically flatlined, or it's been very slowly growing since about the early 70s. We've been on, I say we, but basically Western civilization had been on like a 250 year up curve from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution until the early 70s, and then it just dramatically slowed down. Like it did, most of the productivity growth in the past 50 years has been like in information technology, and that's been real. But even that, a lot of the juice has been squeezed out of that arch. The caveat, I guess, is we'll see what AI can do for good or ill, and maybe that is a huge catalyst for productivity growth going forward. The point is that we need to innovate more on basic science and technology in order to increase productivity, because stuff. That is the driver for rising living standards.
Totally. Got to build.
What's that?
Got to build stuff.
You have to build things, and you've got to be good at doing it.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, you make the point too. Last thing before we go, the financialization of everything.
Yeah.
And your friend Peter Thiel. I make sure I get this right. If your only job is to make a small piece of paper that says you owe me money on it, it's probably not a good sign, right? I'm thinking, man, that's a lot of people in this country, because this whole, it's like this mindset now around this financialization, which then steers everything up to Wall Street, and it creates this growing gap, and we've got to have a different society going forward.
Ever since I heard Peter say that years ago, when he says in New York it's like all these towers full of people whose only job is to write out little pieces of paper, IOUs, that they give to other people that say you owe me money.
It's crazy.
That's the financial industry.
When I read that,
I can't now. Every time I'm thinking about New York or Wall Street or whatever, that's all I think about.
I know. Same here. It makes you look at things differently.
It's just massive malinvestment of human capital.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, lots of problems, good solutions out there. Yes. Great book. Really appreciate what you did here. Again, a good summary, a good fact-based, data-proven summary of the things that are wrong, and then some good solutions for it. So congratulations on the book, and I really appreciate you coming on, Chris.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
First Right, a new kind of news summary without the liberal slant. Every morning, in your inbox, always free. Subscribe by texting First Right to 30161. That's First Right, all caps, one word, to 30161.